Welcome to Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, brought to you by Holy Chuck Burgers. Our business is burgers.
Good morning, Katarina Witt. There's no such thing as bad boys, only boys with bad hair.
Sponsored by Maxwell's Clothiers, your bespoke tailor since 1961. And now, your host of Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, Chuck Bastie. And welcome back. This is Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo. I'm your producer, Cam LaRock, with always our host, Chuck Bastie. Chuck, what's going on?
That's me. We're going to be doing some mental health initiatives, Cameron. So we are going to have a series of shows with our mental health specialist, Steven Morris. And I've known Steven for about over 10 years now. And he's one of my most favorite people in the world with like amazing insights. And I couldn't think of anybody more that I would want to have on my show to talk mental health. And these series are designed to really talk about your own mental health as a human being. If you are a parent as well, and you're noticing mental health aspects of your child, these are red flags. These are indicators that you can actually use. Steven is going to be able to give us a host of topics that we are going to go through. So that way we can add more support and more understanding and certainly a lot more information to people and how they can help other people or help themselves or whatever works for them. So I'm really excited to have Steven Morris on the show.
Yeah, like what you always say at the end of our show, people helping people is powerful stuff. And Steven has a lot to offer and a lot to help us with. So I think we might as well bring him up now. I'll get out of here. We'll get this show on the road to start.
You bet. Thanks, Cam. And it's my great pleasure to bring on the show my good friend, Steven Morris. Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me on to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, like I was just saying to Cameron, there's just nobody that I know in my world or my realm that I value their opinion more. And obviously you and I have known each other for over 10 years. And whenever I've struggled with my mental health or when I've ever been up against obstacles I couldn't solve on my own, I've always trusted you for anything in my life that I just say, hey, listen, I need another opinion or I need your insight on this right now because I'm stuck and I don't want to be stuck. Can you please help me see another way? And you've always been miraculously amazing at helping me understand, never telling me what, your opinion is, but really listening to me and then finding out what you see and sharing that with me and then letting me come to my own grips and then kind of throwing that back on you. And then you're just saying, yeah, so I think you got it there. And that's been an amazing benefit to my life. So just before we started the show, I just want to thank you for who you've been for me in my journey as well, because, I've never said this to you, I don't think, as much as I'm saying this to you now, but it's made a huge difference in my life.
Honestly, man, you're really welcome. It's first of all, thanks for the kind words, but I'm a huge believer in you don't have to be a therapist to have a therapeutic conversation. So, the biggest thing about that is just listening and then reflecting back what you were telling me based on the stuff that I've been trained in and the stuff that I work with every single day, not only in my own journey, but in the journey of people that I'm supporting. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to be a part of your own journey too, man. So I appreciate the kind words, but you're very welcome.
Thanks, buddy. So before we start, I figured we just kind of give you an introduction about who you are. This is our very first show on mental health. We are going to do a series of these with you as our guest, talking about a variety of different topics. And then today we'll start off with personality and the development and how we take that as human beings and how that adversely or benefits us, and how we develop character moving forward with our pathology, I guess.
Yeah.
But before we get to that point there, I figured I'd just give you the ability just to kind of introduce yourself to our audience and just give them a little bit of a snippet of who you are, who you became, how you got here, and a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it as brief as I can, but basically I'm a registered psychotherapist. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't prescribe medication or give official diagnoses or anything like that. I'm a psychotherapist. So what that means is that I provide talk therapy to people based on the modalities that I've been trained in. And there's a number of different modalities that I've been trained in. They revolve around things like schema therapy and internal family systems, which we're going to talk quite a bit about today. dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. So over the years, basically, I've been trained in these different things, studied at college and university, psychology and addiction counseling. So right now I'm in private practice. I'm a registered psychotherapist with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario, which is the CRPO. I'm also a certified addiction counselor and a recovery coach. I'm in full-time private practice, which I've been that way now for about 18 months. Prior to that, though, I was working part-time in private practice and working full-time with the Canadian Mental Health Association in the city of Brampton, where I was a therapist. I was also the lead for addiction services in the agency, so got involved in a lot of programming behind the scenes, developed their smart recovery program, had a lot to do with their development of their dialectical behavior therapy skills program. Before that, I worked in a assertive community treatment team, which is basically working with a lot of people that are dealing with things like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, people that are in and out of hospital, in and out of the court system. So a lot of crisis work. I was the concurrent disorders or addiction counselor on that particular team. So working with people that were using a lot of substances, in and out of problems, in and out of the hospital. Before that, I worked on an outreach team. So a lot of experience working with people who were either marginally housed or homeless, in and out of shelter system, working with hospitals and the court system again. So again, a lot of crisis work, working with people who've got some serious mental health issues and addiction issues. Before that, I worked in residential treatment at a couple of different places, both men's facilities for addiction and mental health issues. So one in King City, another one in Guelph. And before that, I was in school studying, as I said, all those psychology and addiction counseling and learning all about how to provide therapy. Before that, I myself was somebody that was living an addictive lifestyle. So for the better part of 20 years, was addicted to alcohol, drugs, a number of different processes, sobered up just over a decade ago, got into school after a couple of years of sobriety, went through all that training and that experience. And now this is basically what I do for a living. So short of it all is that's basically what's brought me to this space now, where basically I've worked with people who are either dealing with mental health and addiction issues or just trying to learn more about those things, predominantly trying to promote behavior change to take away from these obsessive and compulsive and addictive mechanisms that people are using.
Okay, so that's a great introduction as well. So that way we understand who you are. I figure if people like you, they can trust you. If they trust you, they'll listen to you. And so like what I'd like to do is just dive into, so our first topic we're going to cover is personality styles and basically like how that works, what the pathology is of personality, how it's developed. Because I think that'll give us a better understanding moving forward in show one, that we can actually start to roll out the layers of the onion and then get to other topics as well. We're going to cover coping mechanisms, trauma, addiction, mental health, like you said before, and then just roll that out. But I figured, unless we understand first how personality is formed and how you become the person that you are, which leads to the results that you give or get, I figured we could just walk through that first. So can you just walk us through basically what your findings were and what what you've observed and what your practice has been about?
Yeah, sure. So, the fundamental principle that we want to start with is that all of your behaviors come from personality. There are a number of different ideas out there about what personality is, what it's made up from, where it comes from, how it manifests in our behaviors. But they all basically agree that everything we do comes from your personality. So all of your behavior patterns are activated as a result of your development of your personality. And so I personally work from two specific modalities when we start talking about the development of personality. One is called schema therapy, and the other is called internal family systems. So I'm not a purist in either of these, so I don't follow them religiously. I tend to draw from both models when it comes to working with clients, because I think there's no kind of black and white, one size fits all kind of model. So I like to pull from all different kinds of models to use all different types of skills and tools. But basically, personality is made up as a result of a number of different things. The first thing that we want to be aware of is the genetics that are involved in the development of personality. So when we're talking about this stuff, there's a lot of things that you are born with genetically. But when we're talking about personality, according to the schema therapy internal family systems model, the model that I work from, really there is only one thing that we're born with when it comes to the development of your personality, and that is your nature or your temperament. So temperament wise, you can be kind of anxious or calm. You can be obsessive versus distractible. You can be passive versus aggressive. You can be shy versus sociable. But the big one that really comes into play when we start talking about addictive, obsessive coping mechanisms and mental health issues revolves around emotional sensitivity and non-reactive. So when we start talking about the temperament that people are born with, most of the people that I work with, when we start getting into those addictive, obsessive coping mechanisms, those behavior patterns that are creating problems in your life, they seem to be what's classified as a highly sensitive person. So what that means is that a highly sensitive person has, they're a lot more, their emotions impact them a lot more. So it's on a continuum. It's not black and white. It's not, it's not on or off. It's not I'm emotionally sensitive or I'm non-reactive. It's on a continuum with highly sensitive at one end of the continuum and non-reactive at the other end of the continuum. So if you're somebody that's very non-reactive to your emotions, you'd probably come across as being quite cold, being lacking empathy with other people, like no connection to how you feel. Very black and white about things in a non-emotional kind of way. If you're on the other side of the continuum, which is really emotionally sensitive, then you're somebody who's really impacted by your emotions the second they start coming into your system, because you go into what's called a state of emotional distress or dysregulation. So when you're in that state, when you're emotionally dysregulated, we're going to talk about this in another show, but you automatically go into what's called a state of fight or flight, because you're not able to deal with your emotions, which then starts to create this way of looking at the world that develops all these different stories that we have.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there that I kind of really identify with, the highly sensitive person. I've always been labeled as, oh, Chuck, you're so oversensitive, you're too emotional. And my dad was in the Army. My mother was very, very stoic. My brother didn't really have any ability to be expressive. I was very extroverted. He's very introverted. So I really felt like I was the black sheep of the family. I still feel like I'm black sheep of the family.
Right.
But like the things that you've mentioned about being able to regulate your emotions, I just never had that. It's taken me years, and I'm still really learning on how to actually not be triggered, not to fly off the handle, as they say, not to lose my shit. And that was always been something that I feel has been indicative of my entire life. And it's always been a go-to, like a hammer as a tool. And I don't have a screwdriver. I don't have a saw. That's the only thing I have, and anger. And those are the two things that I actually had. When you're talking about this type of personality and people like cementing where they feel they fit on the spectrum that you're saying, how are you able to have them identify for where they are on that, and then how they develop that personality side and how it works for them?
Yeah. So once people start to recognize, usually when I have an opening conversation with people, I'll put this premise to them that the vast majority of people that struggle with addictive or obsessive coping mechanisms fall somewhere on this continuum of being a highly sensitive person. Most people instantaneously go, "Oh God, yeah, that's me," because it gives an idea for why we have such a hard time coping with the emotion when it comes up for us. So I myself identify as being a highly sensitive person, much like you, Chuck. And the way that plays out is that inside of every interaction that we're having, every emotional experience that we go through, is basically a window of opportunity where we're able to tolerate the emotion and work with the emotion in a healthy way. So if you think about it, somebody who is more on the non-reactive side of that continuum that I was talking about before probably has a window of tolerance that's kind of like this, right? So when their emotional experience is inside of that window of tolerance, they're able to cope with things, they're able to think things through rationally, think things through clearly, and react in kind of a healthy adult way to deal with those particular situations. Now, the further down the continuum you are of somebody who is a highly sensitive person, that window of tolerance gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you're really, if you're on this side of the continuum, then the opportunity that you have to cope with the emotion when it comes up for you, and we're talking about things like guilt and shame or sadness or fear, loneliness, all these different kind of feelings that come into your system, particularly fear. When these emotions come into your system, then it takes you outside of that window of tolerance really quickly if that window of tolerance is quite small. Now, that window of tolerance is also influenced by a lot of other things. So if you're not sleeping properly, if you're not eating properly, if you're not exercising properly, if you aren't somebody that practices mindfulness, we're going to talk about all these things later on as well. but also if you're somebody who's experienced childhood trauma. So the more traumatic experiences you've had in your life, it makes that window even smaller. So it's a huge thing to understand that, you know, when you go outside of this window of tolerance, it's very difficult for you to regulate your behaviors. And it often gives people an idea of why they do the things that they do.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to kind of bridge, like, you've piqued my interest right now of everyone starting off. Say you start off, you're an infant, you start to learn, you start to grow, you start to speak, you have your first experiences, and now layers of those experiences that you're having as a human being are now going to add to how you learn, like, to get what you want, because as human beings, that's what we're good for, to get our childhood needs, our childhood needs met. And I want to kind of segue into the met childhood needs that we have, and how that flows into developing our personality.
Yeah. So just before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about how that temperament influences the way you see the world, and then that can signify a lot around unmet childhood needs. So the temperament that you've got it plays a significant role in the way that you see the world as it develops when you're a child. So the big thing to understand about children, and this is, I've got kids of my own, so I see this on a regular basis, that the big thing to understand about children is, in essence, they're kind of egotistical with things. So the world kind of revolves around them, and it's very difficult for them to see outside of the box of their own little bubble. So, for example, if little Johnny's sitting around playing on the carpet in the living room, and Dad comes home from work, and he gets up and runs over, and he's like, "Daddy, Daddy," and Dad's had a bad day, and he slams his bag down on the table, goes straight past little Johnny into the kitchen, and starts talking to his wife about what a horrible day he's had. Little Johnny doesn't step back and go, "Oh, wow, Dad's having a bad day." Little Johnny steps back and goes, "What did I do wrong?" So they see inside of their own bubble. We, when we're children, see inside of our own bubble. And your temperament has a significant impact. The nature that you're born with has a significant impact in the way that you see those things. So, for example, if you're shy versus sociable, or more of introverted versus extroverted, and that situation plays out, or if you're raised in a situation where you're experiencing a certain amount of criticism as a child from a caregiver or a parent. If you are on the introverted side of things, that criticism that you're receiving will be turned into a story about what a failure you are, what a loser you are, how you're not good enough to do anything. Whereas if you're on the extroverted side of things, that temperament will shape the story about what's happening, about how other people are mean. You can't trust other people. They're not the people that you want to be around, and you've got to be always on your guard around people. So your nature dictates the type of stories that you start to create as a result of your childhood experiences. And all of those childhood experiences revolve around trying to meet your emotional needs.
Okay, so getting back to that, and I'm glad that you brought up the insight that children inherently, they don't have the tools that we have, or the insight, or the examples. Empathy is a big thing, because you said, "Hey, listen, would a child say, 'Oh, it looks like Dad's had a bad day,' because the whole world in his eyes revolves around his experience, and he's always had that attention."
Right.
The little child that you mentioned as well. And then from that point there, I mean, empathy obviously being the biggest connector of understanding somebody else's experience, stepping back, giving them space as well. That being said, moving forward through that, that experience for them, for us to get our childhood needs met, in order to satisfy our, internal self or our ego, how does that play out as far as developing that personality?
Yeah. So then inside of our system, we have this innate desire to meet these emotional needs, which are often termed as childhood needs, right? So your childhood needs fall into 5 different categories. So we're trying to meet our needs in the realms of attachment to others. We're trying to meet the needs in the realms of autonomy and the things that we do. We want freedom to be able to express ourselves and talk about things in an open way and know that that's going to be heard. We want to have spontaneity in play. So we want to learn how to be spontaneous and playful in a healthy way. We want that modeled. We want to be able to do it and not have it shut down. And then we want to be able to, sorry, I've completely forgot the 5th one. Can we cut and go back to that?
Yeah.
brain,
Okay.
my
Let's go
brain
back to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we're good.
blank.
I marked her there, so
I was
just
just saying this as well. So mark this so that way we can actually, when Steve's going through this, we can use text on screen and
mhm.
just like, he's saying the first one and then we'll use text in post-op.
Okay.
I think it's a good visual cue so that way people don't just hear it, they actually see it. So the visual people can actually process that.
My brain just went completely blank when I
Well, it
was.
happens.
Right.
Okay, I'll get out of here, and you guys can just take off
Okay.
when you
So
left
can
from.
we just pick up from like where he was jumped in on solo or?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
can bring the screen back to that.
Okay. So Steve, he'll just bring you back up and you just say the five criteria as
Yeah.
if you were answering my question.
Okay. Yeah. So when we start talking about unmet childhood needs, there's basically what we're trying to do is meet these emotional needs so that we can develop into healthy adults, right? And when these needs are met, we start to go out into the world with a healthy sense of self. And these needs basically fall into 5 categories. The first is the need for attachment to others. So we want to feel like we're connected, like we belong, like we're heard and understood, like we fit into the environment that we're in. The second revolves around autonomy. So we want to be able to feel like we're capable and able to do things. We can make our own decisions. And if we make those decisions, we know how to deal with them. The third revolves around freedom. So I want to have the freedom to express myself, to talk about how I feel, to express what my opinion is and know that that opinion is relevant in the world that I'm existing in. The fourth revolves around spontaneity and play. So I want to be able to be spontaneous and playful so that I can practice things like self-care when I'm a healthy adult. Most people who struggle with self-care really have a hard time around unmet needs around spontaneity and play. So they weren't allowed to play when they were children. There was other things that they had to do, so they didn't develop that need. That need wasn't met. And then the fifth and final one revolves around boundaries. So knowing how to respect my boundaries internally. So understanding, where those boundaries come from, what kind of issues they revolve around, and understanding the boundaries of others. So when somebody sets a boundary with me, I respect that. I know what it is. I don't make it about abandonment or rejection, and I know that how to set my boundaries with other people. So inside of these 5 different realms, if those needs are not met, what happens is we start to develop stories about ourselves and the world around us and who other people are inside of that world in order to try to cope with what's going on in life.
Yeah, and I just wanted to see if you can kind of give us an example in your own life that you can choose from where all these things kind of come together, so that way the listener, our audience, can actually kind of identify with some examples as well, so they can play that in their own life and then get that one thing for themselves.
Yeah, so I think the big one that comes up for pretty much everybody that I work with and everybody that I talk to about these things is the unmet need for attachment. So the need for attachment revolves around feeling like you fit in, feeling like you belong, feeling like you're a part of something in the family. So these needs start getting met with mom and dad, and then out into siblings and extended family, and they just kind of grow from that early environment out into the way that you see in the world. So in my own life, I grew up in a pretty, would be considered to be a pretty healthy family environment, and inside of that environment, there was a lot of people like my brother, my dad, my mom were really into sports. And my brother was a really well-known soccer player. Sorry, I almost said football. Soccer player there and in the community, and everything revolved around sports. Now, I played sports. I was all right at sports. I wasn't brilliant at anything. I was kind of jack of all trades. But my big passion really underneath the surface was I absolutely adored science fiction. But I never really got to talk about it. I always felt like it wasn't something that I could talk about because I was a geek, I was a nerd, I was labeled that way when I talked about those things. So I kept that hidden inside of my personality. I talked about it, but it wasn't really something that I expressed, which left me with a belief that I didn't fit in the family that I was a part of. So I don't belong, I'm not heard, I'm not understood. I'm not recognized in the family. So now I start to develop a schema. So when we start talking about the stories, as a result of that, I start to develop a schema of what's called social isolation. So social isolation is a story that I don't fit in.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought the schema, because that's something I think that the human brain is geared for thinking. It's geared for coming to an answer. It doesn't have to be the right answer,
Yeah.
but it has to have some sort of conclusion, or it has to have some sort of like answer to our problem. So that way we don't just keep going around in circles and circles. So talking about these stories that we have, where do these now come into play, where they now start to take, big, huge strides in adapting to our personalities?
Yeah. So now, as a result of these experiences that we're having and these unmet childhood needs, we start to develop these what are called psychological schemas. So if you think of the word schema, it's the short form of the word schematic. If you think of what a schematic is, it's basically a blueprint. So when you think about blueprints in general, most people think about buildings. So when you look at a blueprint of a building, you get to see where everything is, how everything works, how everything operates, what's going on in that particular building. If you need to find your way in and out of that building, you can use this blueprint to find your way in and out in a really successful and timely manner. So when we talk about psychological blueprints or psychological schemas, what happens is when these schemas are active in your system, it's the blueprint for the way that you see the world. And that blueprint is basically dictating who you are in the world, who everybody else is that's around you, and what the world itself is. And they revolve around things like you can have a schema for abandonment, you can have a schema for mistrust of yourself or others, you can have a schema of failure, a schema of shame. You can have a schema of entitlement, so I can have whatever I want. But these schemas, basically, you're not walking around with these schemas constantly active in your system. So, when things are going quite well, you might have some, really positive schemas. You might be open to conversation. You might have a bit of self-compassion for other people. You might have a pretty solid sense of self and, walking around doing things in a pretty healthy kind of way. But then something happens in the external world, which is a trigger for the activation of this particular schema in your system. And this schema is related to unmet childhood needs and the things that you decided about yourself at a really young age. So as an adult, I was walking around in my mid-30s, late 30s before I started doing this kind of work, and reacting to things in the moment based on a story that I'd developed because of my childhood experiences and my unmet childhood needs. So as I'd gone through life then, I basically got this schema that gets activated. Let's say it's a schema of abandonment. So every time that schema gets activated in my system, I'm gathering more evidence and locking it away in my brain for how this story is true. And they get to the point where they actually feel like fact.
And it's funny that you say that, because I was like world class, a great schemer of anything that I can manipulate back to my woe is me, or that person's against me, or that person's racist, or that person hates short guys with curly hair, like all of these things here that I just created. And like one of the things that I was thinking while you were saying this is that doesn't make my set of eyes I'm not. They're not viewers; they're projectors.
Exactly.
Because from what you're saying, the schemers that are coming up, and it's not like consciously I see something I don't like, and my brain goes, well, you know what? There's that unmet childhood need there, and you've got that open wound from when you were a playground, kid, and you got bullied on the monkey bars, and that guy, and now the person in front of you is now like parading around as that bully in your mind. Psychologically, that happens like this, boom, and I'm triggered. And I'm into that moment, and I'm absolutely held like mercilessly a victim to that experience that I haven't healed, and the lack of that healing that I don't know is not healed comes up, and inevitably I'm just going to shit on the person in front of me, or demean them, or because I'm out of power. I'm out of like self-esteem or whatever that is. And I need to get that back.
Yeah.
That's fuel. And what I found I was doing is it didn't matter if it was good fuel or bad fuel. It was fuel. And I had the little, the ego on my shoulder. I call it my little Chucky doll. But Chucky's only job is to keep, Chucky safe in the moment. And I just say, well, what happens if I tell my boss to go off himself?
Yeah.
Chucky goes, yeah, do it. And then the next day I get fired. I go to Chucky. I'm like, why did I get fired? He's like, well, that's your problem. Yeah. And that's a real story. And I was just like, well, why didn't you tell me that? That's not my job. My job is in the moment to keep you safe from all these schemers that are going on. Right. And this is what happened. And that just had a profound impact on my life. I remember one time one of my mentors said, walking me through a trigger moment, like what you mentioned. And he said, where's that in your life? And I looked at him like, you mean besides everywhere. It's like, it was like, that was my whole life too. So
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to that moment there. So like eyes being projectors. So
Yeah.
not something that you see, but there's something that your schemer belief system or is now projecting upon what you are seeing. What's the impact upon that, upon what we deal with in people's lives?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything that you're talking about there is completely relevant to where we're going in the conversation now, because when these schemas are active and something happens that activates it, you're right. The way that you're seeing the world isn't necessarily based in actuality. It's based in this reality that you've created based on the stories that you've been developing over time. So now you're seeing the world through this particular viewpoint. You've got what we call psychological filters. Usually there's two predominant psychological filters that I work with in the one-on-one work that I do. First is what's called a confirmation bias. So I get this filter that's just filled with confirmation bias, looking for all the evidence that backs up this schema that's active in my system. And then the second one, which we talk about quite a bit, is what's called a hindsight bias filter. So, when I'm looking back at things from the past, there is this way of looking at stuff that's kind of like, well, I should have known this and I should have known that. That's based on the particular situation that you're in now, based on the knowledge that you've got now, rather than the knowledge that you had at the time. So these two psychological filters float around, and they're activated by these schemas when they kick in your system. Now, as a result of these schemas kicking in, there are different parts of your personality, or what are called modes of behavior, that get activated trying to cope with the emotional impact of the story that's active in your system. And usually the first port of call is what's called your internal critic. Now, your internal critic is basically an internalized version of either something that you heard when you were a kid or something that you felt when you were a kid. So, this internal critic either starts making demands of yourself or other people, or it starts criticizing in a really punitive way, talking about, what a loser you are, or what an idiot you are, or how stupid that person is. And it starts to ramp up the emotional experience that's in your system, which then activates these other parts of your personality that are kicking in, trying to cope with that emotional experience that you're having. So the first port of call that we really need to look at when we're doing this kind of work is understanding your internal critics and the role that they play in the way that your emotional experience plays out.
So would my internal critic be my little Chucky doll that sits on my shoulder that wants to kill everybody?
Yeah, and that's why it's really important to understand the language of what's going on inside of your thought process, right? So we want to listen to the different language that's happening in your thoughts, so that you can start to identify these different parts of your personality as they're being activated by the story. So internal critics basically fall into demanding or punitive categories. So the demanding critic is, they shouldn't have done it that way. They shouldn't have done it like this. You always make that mistake. You always do these things. And your punitive critic is going, what a loser you are. You're so stupid. These things, you're always screwing these things up. So sometimes they're a combination of the two. But just recognizing these internal critics about yourself and others and the influence that it has on your emotions is massive. It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
And you say that, and why you say that, I make a really weird face, because I'm just like, man, I got both of those, and they're
For sure.
And they're so loud. I mean, it's nonstop, and it was years before I really struggled this for years, and I thought that voice was me. Like, man, I'm my world's worst critic. I used to say that I'm the world's biggest underachiever.
Yeah.
And that was my voice saying that, but I heard it as if it was my voice in my head, as it's saying that, even though it was internal, it wasn't actually out loud. I never said, wow, you're the biggest loser I know. Like, there's nobody bigger underachiever than you. Like, that's all internal. But yet when I heard it, or the thought went off in my head, it had the audio of my voice as the narrator.
Yeah,
and it wasn't until years later that I actually had to realize that's not you.
Yeah.
That's your, like that. And I had to be able to differentiate. Now, the saying is, whatever you resist persists. Mm-hmm. So if I were to fight against that voice, that was round and round, it was exhausting. That was a hamster wheel that didn't ever stop. That's when you lose sleep. That's when, I just start hating people. I want to throat punch everybody, because like that narrative is something that I took on as my own belief system, as opposed to now I just say, there's my Chucky doll again, or there's my ego, or there's my unmet childhood need. Because I actually have to stop myself. Okay, I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. What is the emotion? Sit into it. All right. Now the problem is I didn't want to sit in that emotion because it was very, very uncomfortable. What do I want to do? I want to go watch sports. I want to jump on my phone. I
Yeah.
want to be able to, call somebody. I want to go shopping. I want to be able to use a coping mechanism to get out of that really, really trying emotion that I didn't have the tools, the space, the patience to sit into and say, there it is again. Now let's do a little bit of investigation here of like, where is that coming from? Because I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Me as the observer.
Yeah.
Sitting in that and then say, there it is again. And that happened hundreds of times a day when I was willing to catch it. When I was cognitive about somebody like you telling me how I could catch it and then walk it backwards and then be able to say, there it is again. There's that same old wound again. Wow, it's really active today. And like, wow, okay, good to know. And rather than me spending 3 days in the fetal position in my bed or go smoking or drinking or having sex or gambling or coping mechanism my way out of it, then it was able for me to actually sit inside of that and then take that internal critic and just say, hey, Chucky, it's okay, brother. We got this one. Thanks a lot for having my back. Really appreciate that. And then Chucky goes, oh, okay, so you don't need me? I'm like, no, we're good, dude. I got where this is coming from. I understand why you're there. I understand why you popped up. Hey, thanks for having our back. And then Chucky goes away. And that has made a huge difference in me being able to emotionally regulate. Now I'm still human. And sometimes I lose my shit. Like, and then I become Bill Burr on stage as a stand-up comedian, like, like, and then sometimes my girlfriend says, hey, I think you need to go for a walk. Do you need to go for a walk? And I'm like, yeah, I need to go for a walk. Yeah, good call. And then I got to go, but then I can sit in the tools and then I can actually do what you've taught me or sit inside of the distinctions of saying, okay, so let's walk this backwards. Where's the disconnect? Where's the threat? Why are you angry about this? And I would always go, I'm angry because I'm angry. That's the reason why I'm angry, because we're all angry. Like, oh, I'm angry, you're angry, we're all angry. Like, well, how's that worked for your entire life? I'm like, well, it really sucks. And it's put you in jail, or it's put you in a firing position, or it's put you unemployed or divorced or whatever that is. And I know where that road goes down to. That's a dead end road that I know really well doesn't work. Or I can start listening to someone like yourself and say, okay, cool. I'm really clear my way doesn't work. I want to be happier. I want to live a more fulfilled life. I want to be a better father. I want to be a better son. I want to be a better coach. I want to be a better employee. How do I do this? Where do you go with people like that?
So what you're talking about there is like right on the money, because what you're describing is after the internal critics, the next thing that happens is in response to those internal critics is there is a part of your personality or multiple parts of your personality that kick in with specific behavior modes, trying to cope with the emotional impact in your system. And the thing to understand about these behavior modes is they are literally just protection mechanisms for whatever vulnerability has been activated in your system. So at the core of your personality, there is this vulnerable child. And this vulnerable child is probably sitting in things like loneliness, sadness, or guilt and shame, trying to make sense of the world from a time when you were little, around why these things were happening, why these needs weren't being met, what's wrong with me, why am I so lonely, why am I full of shame, why do I keep doing these things, activating guilt in your system. So your system goes on high alert, trying to protect that vulnerability that's underneath the surface. And quite often, one of the protection mechanisms that kicks in is anger. So whenever I'm working with people who are talking about anger, I start off with the fundamental understanding that anger is a secondary emotion, in that it's coming from a part of your personality that is trying to protect this vulnerability that's underneath the surface. And in the schema therapy model, there's 3 different ways that anger starts to present itself for you. And in 3 different styles of different parts of your personality. The first is in an angry child. So there's an angry child part of my personality that kicks in. And the intention behind the angry child part of your personality is to get people to listen to your point of view, to hear what it is that you're trying to say. So the way that this manifests in behavior patterns is there is this schema that gets activated in your system. Your internal critic starts chirping about how nobody's listening to you. And then your angry child kicks in and goes, you're not listening to me. You're not paying attention to me. You're not understanding me. You need to hear me, and starts behaving that way with a massive amount of anger that's behind it. Now, the intention is to get people to listen, but what actually happens is that people stop listening because of the expression of anger. So it just keeps ramping it up and ramping it up. Then usually what happens, or it might even start with this, but the second type of anger is what's called an angry protector. So an angry protector, while the angry child is saying, listen to me, hear me, understand me, an angry protector gets to a point where it just says, get away from me. I don't want you near me. You don't understand me. Get away from me. I don't care if you're trying to listen to me. And it's this massive expression of rage and anger trying to push people away from you. And then the third type of anger that comes out is in a bully. So this internal part of your personality that is basically in a bully attack mode. So it's going on the attack with words, with sometimes with physical actions, basically trying to hurt the other person because I feel hurt inside, right? So there's this fear in my system that you're attacking this particular vulnerability, maybe trying to make me feel ashamed or make me feel guilty. So this bully attack mode goes on the attack with you, trying to hurt you to stop that thing from happening. All of them are trying to control the external world to stop you feeling the way you do internally.
Yeah, it just blows my mind that we've gotten this far as a race of human beings with all this going on, because I can sit and listen to you and just think of example after example after example, where I've done that, where my parents have done that, or their parents have done that, and it just gets passed down and passed down. And it would have been really, really reassuring to know that like there was a different way, different understanding, a different set of tools that we could use to actually really be taught this in school, and then be able to be more functional human beings that would live up better to our potential and goal setting and altruism of what we could achieve, as long as we weren't just being petulant little children with unmet childhood needs, being knee-jerk reactors, about something that's threatened to us in the moment because of something that we've created.
Right.
It has nothing to do with what reality is out there. I always say there's 8 billion people out there. 8 billion people all see the exact same thing the exact same way, and it would just never happen. Like, for example, I put up a photo on my Facebook, and I just said, what do you see with this picture? No wrong answer, no judgment. I'm not going to respond to this. Just want to see what you're going to see. And it was crazy about like what everyone saw. And if I can look and see, from an observer point of view, what I knew of the person who was commenting, it made sense because their eyes were now projectors of what they wanted that picture to see, or what they wanted to see in that picture, as opposed to just saying, oh, it's a bunch of guys, or it's a bear, or it's guys bunch playing basketball, whatever that is, what it was. But they made it mean something to them that they were actually having an agenda in.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what their perspective actually dictated what they wanted it to be and how it served them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I love the skills of dialectical behavior therapy as a principle from which we build from, because one of the big skills in there is called checking the facts. And when you check the facts, it's when you take your story and you look at what's actually happening as opposed to your story, and you differentiate between the two. Because the vast majority of people, when they're looking at something, are looking at it through a filter of their stories from the past, a filter of what it is that they expect to be happening. And I always love the expression and use it quite a lot, is that we're always living into our past, right? Rather than living into new experiences, we're living into the experience of the past and behaving accordingly, with all these different coping mechanisms that are kicking in, trying to deal with that story.
So you bring up dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, as it's known in short term. It's obviously differs from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT. So I just thought maybe you could just explain the differences between CBT and DBT.
Okay, so DBT actually, so this is quite a common thing that people say, is that cognitive behavior therapy is actually an umbrella term for a whole bunch of different therapies. Inside of cognitive behavior therapy, you have dialectical behavior therapy, you have acceptance and commitment therapy, you have rational emotive behavior therapy, and you have the original, well, not the original, but the one that everybody calls CBT, which is cognitive therapy. So DBT is basically a skills building program where there is a little bit of cognitive therapy in it, in that we're trying to understand what our stories are, what's going on in our system, but it's predominantly revolves around behavior patterns that we're trying to put into place to help us live the life that we want to live. So it starts with one of the, in my opinion, probably one of the most important things for people to develop if we're trying to create any kind of behavior change is a mindfulness practice. Now, most people, when I start talking about mindfulness, their eyes roll back in the back of their heads and they're like, oh my God, here we go. Got to empty my mind of thoughts and all that sort of stuff. Actually, from a DBT perspective, mindfulness is looked at recognizing how full your mind is of thoughts and being able to observe and describe these thoughts as particular parts of your personality or behavior patterns that are trying to come out that fall into 3 different states of mind. So the first state of mind is emotion mind. So when I'm in an emotion mind space, there's a part of me that is really emotional in its response. So it's that angry child. It might be the angry protector that's activated in my system. And I'm blending with that particular part of me in order to behave that way. Then there is reason mind on the other side, which is where there's all these parts that have no empathy. They're quite cold. They're very rational and logical in the way that we see the world. And when I'm blended with parts from that person, that side of my personality, I'm really not understanding what other people's needs are. It's very, very cold in the reaction. It lacks empathy in any way. So what tends to happen is people get dominant and flip back and forth, black and white, into 2 different states of mind. What we're trying to create is this middle of the road, which is called wise mind. So in wise mind, we're able to see what's happening to the parts of us in emotion mind and see what's happening to the parts of us in reason mind, understand where they're coming from, but make a decision based on all of the evidence that's there, including the facts. So fundamentally, there has to be some kind of a mindfulness practice to build self-awareness. The vast majority of people think they're self-aware, but the vast majority of people are not self-aware when you start having those kind of conversations.
I'm really self-aware that I have no self-awareness is what I'm saying. It's like I'm world class at that as well, because I don't know that, but I do know that. I was going to ask you for an anecdote of something like this, so that way a parent who might come across this for the very first time can identify that as a red flag in their child or themselves or a family member, and then be able to understand that a little better. So could you give us an example of like a behavioral pattern, how DBT would actually function into that, so that way people could better understand that?
Yeah. So in order to understand how DBT would work with that, you need to know what the other 3 criteria, or the other 3 modules are that we work with inside of DBT. So the first is mindfulness, and that underpins everything. That is the primary thing that we need to get down. We need to really understand the mindfulness aspect of it, because without mindfulness, then none of the other skills work. Okay. The second set of skills are what called distress tolerance skills. So in a distress tolerance skill module, you learn specific ways of behaving to try to reduce the amount of damage that's done by your behavior patterns that are reacting to a sense of distress in your system. So the biggest one that I always start with is called the stop skill. So the stop skill, basically in DBT, they use something called mnemonics. So mnemonics is where you take the letter of the word and it means something that you're supposed to do. So STOP, the stop skill. S stands for stop. So as soon as you notice that you're becoming dysregulated, there's an anger that's in your system, there's something that's going on, I'm going to stop. I'm not doing anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm not reacting to anything. I'm not sending a text message, an email. I'm not making a phone call. I'm doing absolutely nothing. And then T, I'm either going to take a deep breath or I'm going to take a step back. That allows me to kind of slow everything down. I'm going to practice my mindful breathing. As I said, mindfulness is really important. So I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to, if I need to, remove myself from the situation so that I can O, which is observe the situation. So when we're observing the situation, I'm either observing externally or I'm observing internally to see what's happening. And this is probably the gateway skill when I talk about DBT skills. This is the gateway skill to implementing some of those other skills. So then the P stands for proceed from a mindful perspective. So stop, take a deep breath, observe what's happening, and proceed from a mindful perspective.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in there for a second. So when you say observe, obviously from the mindfulness standpoint, is it what am I seeing? What am I interpreting? What do I think I'm seeing? Is it being more objective about what's causing the threat to control or the impulse or that? Because I know specifically when I started this work, I didn't have the ability to sit in that in the very beginning. That was a big muscle that I needed to learn. And then objective, because I just wanted to just like make the pain go away.
Yeah.
And then I would just make up shit. You know, that wasn't even there. And it was just like, you know, that really happened? No, but man, did it sound really cool, because it got what I wanted to get out of that, which is I wanted to vilify that person, or I wanted to make that person or demean them or whatever it was. So I felt better about it. But I didn't have the ability to observe inside of that, or to notice what it was. Because someone would say, did that really happen? I'm like, yeah, 100% it happened. Knee jerk. Like, did it really happen? Just exactly 8 billion people in the world. Would they all see it the exact same way? And I would be like, yeah, of course they would. Yeah. And of course they wouldn't.
Right. So the observe piece really goes back to what we were talking about before around understanding your personality and recognizing those different parts of you, like the different modes of behavior that are kicking in, and getting familiar with the language of those particular parts. So what you want to do when you're observing is really pay attention. Yeah, a lot of people focus on observing what's happening externally. So, you know, this guy's here, that guy's there, this is happening there, this is going on, and just really paying attention to the facts of what's happening out there. But the observe internally is probably the most important piece, because what I'm trying to identify is there a part of me that I'm blending with right now? And if there is, I need to describe it in a non-judgmental way. So if I notice that there's a part of me that's getting really angry, the behavior that comes out, or sorry, the response that comes out to deal with that is to label it in a non-judgmental way. So and this is called cognitive diffusion. It's a way to diffuse from that particular part of your personality, or unblend from its behavior pattern. So you literally just label it in a non-judgmental way. So one of the ways that I do that is I notice, wow, there's a part of me that's really angry about that situation. I hear you, buddy. It's okay that you're there. I recognize that you're there. What that does is it disengages me from that particular emotional reaction. And the more that I practice that, the more that it will become a behavior when I fall into that observe phase of my recovery lifestyle. So it becomes habitual for me to respond in that way. But it really comes down to, in the early part of doing this behavior work, learning how to identify what part of your personality is active by the thought process and the feeling that's going on for you, and then cognitively diffusing from it by labeling it in a non-judgmental way. So I wouldn't label it in a way of going, you know, oh, there's that part of me that's angry, and then call it a whole bunch of names, right? Because that's just judging it. I'm just going to label it as, there's a part of me that's really angry. I hear you. I see you. And what that does is it creates a sense of self-validation.
And where do you go past stop?
So stop is, again, it's a distress tolerance skill, right? So it's kind of like the starting point in DBT, where we want to learn how to tolerate the different distress, the level of distress that we're experiencing. Once you're learning how to do these things, the O in the stop skill is the place where you pull on all the other different skills that you can learn. So, you know, if you still find yourself in a level of distress that you just can't tolerate, there's another skill called TIP, which is temperature control, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, or paced breathing. So TIPP. If you notice when you're observing that your emotion is just flying out of control, can I reduce my temperature? So splash cold water on your face, put your hand in freezing cold water or ice. Is it appropriate for me to practice some kind of intense exercise? Because it's been proven that when you involve yourself in a short burst of intense exercise, it shuts down that desire to run away, and it disengages from that particular fight or flight system. Can you practice some paced breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, which is where you tense up your muscles and then let them go, and tense up your muscles and let them go while breathing? So that's another distress tolerance skill. Or you go into what's called emotion regulation, which is the third of the four modules inside of DBT. So in emotion regulation, we do things like check the facts. So we're gonna look at the situation that's going on right now. If I'm able to, you know, if I've reduced that level of distress, now I'm going to check the facts as to what's actually going on, as opposed to what my story is telling me what's going on. And this is a really important skill to learn, because it starts to differentiate between what's going on in actuality and what's going on in the reality that I'm creating.
Yeah, and I just sit in that again, because I really fall victim to my own narrative before I knew that it wasn't my narrative. It was my father's narrative. It was my narrative. It was society. It was my church, my community, my humiliation my guilt, my shame, any of these things,
Yeah.
kick in. And what I've kind of agreed to use in my life is that, if it's a judgmental narrative, it's not me.
Yeah, exactly.
My soul or my kindness will always be, kind. The minute there's a judgment to it in a negative sense, then that's going to go into my narrative of, my ego. And my ego is just not my amigo. Like, we are not friends, my ego and I. And in fact, my ego gets me into a lot of trouble that I'd like to blame on my ego as well, because, that was he'd just say, you do this. And I just said, okay, how do I do that? And then boom, away I go. And I learned amazingly destructive tools that way.
Yeah.
Like really amazing tools. And they worked until they didn't.
Yeah.
They gave me a real glass ceiling of what I thought I could get to. And then, you get to a certain level. They always say if you make $100,000 a year, what you do to make $200,000 a year won't work. In 2,000 to 500,000, 5,000 to $1 million, the tools that you learn to get to that point there, that's the reason why you'll top out at whatever that is that you want. This has been a fantastic conversation, Steve, that I think has been given invaluable insight for people to see where they sit inside that spectrum. I particularly like the observing side. Because that's the side I think that is the real indicator of where you can kind of distance yourself back from the experience as the observer looking at this going, okay, did that really happen? And could I have seen that differently? Or how could I have seen that differently? And like I said, I'd always defer to you by calling you and say, hey, this is my experience. This is what happened. I'm stuck. I need a different view because my way isn't working right now. Can you give me a different perspective?
Right.
And that really, really helped. And then it got to be the point where you and I didn't have to call each other anymore.
Yeah.
Because the muscle had gotten a little stronger, that it was, our 4:30 calls in the afternoon, didn't have to happen anymore because like I could do the work on my own now. I didn't have to waste your time or rely on you as an external source to get that. I'm like, how else could I see this? And I think, while I was practicing this mindfulness and this ability to think rationally and calmly, is I do all my best work in that area.
For sure.
Yeah. And when I'm in fight or flight, there, like I said, there's a glass ceiling of where as an athlete, I could use anger or hatred or resentment or whatever, toxic emotion to really drive through that wall or take the punch and get hit and keep going through and then harness that hatred or that anger or whatever. There is a great example I want to bring up with the Bosa brothers, who are defensive linemen. Joey plays for the Chargers in LA, and his brother Nick plays for the San Francisco 49ers right now. And when I met them in the Bahamas on vacation, and I was saying, hey, how do you get to the quarterback? And they were just so docile. They were so calm. They were so, like really wonderful people. But I see this as anger. And like, he says, I don't waste 1 second of my energy on anger.
Yeah.
Like I have such play and ease when I'm trying to kill Tom Brady that it's a tenth of a second for me to get to that guy and not get to that guy. And I seen how my dad played the position and realized it didn't work. Anger will only take you so far. Right. And when I started actually working with play and ease and humor and lightness, boy, watch my game go through the roof. So I don't have any time for anger. And I never heard of that before, because you see those guys on the football pitch just beating the shit out of each other. And then after the game, tapping each other on the ass, walking away and not taking it personally, because like they've learned that even in that physical domination part of the game, anger just doesn't work.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, anger is it's that thing that, again, like I said, it's a secondary emotion. It's what's going on underneath, and it's completely draining. I've done a number of different exercises when you're in that, you try to force yourself to be in that angry state, and you can only maintain it for a certain amount of time because your whole body just gets sapped of energy, because it takes so much to maintain that level of intensity. So, learning how that anger isn't the best coping mechanism. I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with anger.
Yeah.
Right? It's what you do with anger when it comes out, right? You know, if there's a part of you that's getting angry about a particular situation, it's trying to draw your attention to something. So that's where that stop skill comes into play, and it goes, okay, this is an important thing for me to look at. I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to observe what's going on there to see, is this anger justified? It's always valid. First things first, right? So we need to validate the emotion. I understand why you're angry. Completely get it. But is it justified? So emotion regulation starts with self-validation. But then the big question is I know the emotion is valid, but is the emotion justified? And that's what that observe piece is all about.
Yeah. I want to just go back really quickly to anger being exhausting. I've done an exercise. We called it 3-corner, where you had needy, love, and hatred in 3 different corners. And you had to be 100% for all 3 of those corners for, I think it was 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And it didn't seem like a long time. And I started off in needy, and I was like, come on, give me my love, man. Where's my love? You know, like all that. And then I went to love, and it was just like sitting in just like adoration. It's like I popped an ecstasy pill or something like that. And then I ended off on anger and hatred. And I literally almost passed out because of the blood vessels in my face, and me just taking it to 100% level. And I felt like I needed oxygen after that. And it just wiped me for like a good half an hour. And then I just looked at that, where that was in my life, and was like, and that's what I used for every single situation, was anger, because that's what I was taught. And again, I'm so glad, like you and I have gotten out of that, because I honestly think that anger just takes time off your life.
I mean, for me, I'm an emotionally sensitive person, and it still comes up for me from time to time. I'm not I wouldn't say I've got it completely under control, but it still kind of comes up. But it only rears its ugly head once in a blue moon these days. So shouldn't label it as having an ugly head, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I'm probably not as sophisticated as you are that way. Mine comes up a little bit more. Maybe you're English and I'm Irish, so it's I'm going to blame it on that. That's my Steve coming to the table. That's my story that I'm going to use, and I'm going to end with that. But before we go, I want to thank you for being on the show. But I wanted to give you the last word of where we can find you. We're going to put you back on the show. We're going to talk about it, and then open up the forum as well to people what they want to hear from you. You have a wonderful website which has a great delectable menu where people can get a good synopsis of what you do and how you help people, and what the kind of work that you do and what's available for them. So just really quickly, where can they find you, and can they reach out to you? I know that you have some workshops that you do as well,
for sure,
that are complimentary as well. So just mention that.
Yeah. So obviously theliberationplace.com is the website. On that website, you can find access to all the different groups that I offer. So I facilitate 4 free groups virtually online every single week, 3 of which are what are called the recovery chat room. So we basically have conversations 3 times a week around the theories that I've been discussing today of personality and behavior change and what it takes to make those changes. 90 minutes, 3 times a week. The links are all available on the website. You can also reach out to me at info@theliberationplace.com, which ask me any questions, looking for any resources. I also facilitate a relationship meeting on Saturdays. I co-facilitate a relationship meeting on Saturdays where we talk about what it means to build healthy relationships based on a lot of the principles inside of schema therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, trying to develop those things. So, and then obviously check me out on YouTube, and which is The Liberation Place, Instagram, which is @The Liberation Place, and just reach out for any resources or questions that you might have. I'm more than happy to get back to you when I can.
Awesome. Steven Morris, thank you so much for being on the show. Really love to have you on, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.
You got it. That's Steven Morris, one of my most favorite people in the entire world, in the good universe. Steve and I go way back, and I'll tell you the story of how we met down the road. But I hope that you got value out of what Steve was sharing today as well. If you have any questions, please visit his website, reach out to him. You can do so anonymously as well, and then be able to schedule something that works for you, and give you that tools that you need to do what you want to do in your life that follows what your heart tells you to go to. With that being said, I'm going to bring up my producer, Kim LaRock, who's got a rockin' cool haircut these days. That Vanilla Ice would be jealous over. Kim, what'd you think?
I just sat back in awe the whole time, to be completely honest with you. There's a few times throughout that show that I actually forgot I had a job to do back here, so I got a little distracted. Chuck was going a little nuts on me in the private chat a few times there, but
Chuck wasn't going nuts on you. Chuck was going nuts on you.
Exactly.
My ego was taking over, going, "Wow, come on!"
yeah, I'm just sitting there like, just listening to what Steve has to say, relating it back to my personal experiences, going like, "Oh, that's why I felt that way," or "That's why I reacted in that situation," or whatever the case may be. But yeah, that was an amazing show. That's all I really have to say. Just
biggest takeaway that you had from Steve.
The biggest takeaway I had from Steve was probably just that whole Chucky analogy with anger, and that's not necessarily you. It's just someone inside of you that's kind of bringing out the dark thoughts in yourself.
Yeah.
There was so much stuff throughout that episode that I was just sitting there like, okay, that now it's adding up. Okay, thanks, Steve. You're helping me put two and two together a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny that you say like Chucky as well, because like he's not just that destructive doll in the movie Child's Play. He's a real thing that sits on my shoulder 24/7. Like, he was dreaming last night of like killing people. And I had to wake up this morning and go like, wow, Chucky, you were really, really angry last night. I don't know where that came from. And, it's not just a great name because, Holy Chuck, comes out of Chucky as well. But, and I want to do our due diligence by thanking Johnny, the owner for Holy Chuck. He's the one who has been sponsoring our mental health initiatives. Holy Chuck Burgers is the title sponsor of obviously Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo. And he's a huge advocate for the mental health world as well. If you go into Holy Chuck, they have a different set of burgers that you could actually have, or if you buy one, Johnny will make a charitable donation to the Canadian Mental Health Association Talk Today program. So that way people who are being able to get the help that they want from CMHA, from Talk Today, are able to do that. So Johnny, we wanted to thank you for your great sponsorship and your ability to help people, which is powerful stuff.